All right, Eric Bugenhagen versus Mike Israetel. So I don't normally watch fitness influencers or drama or informational videos. There's not much need for me to do any of that. But occasionally I'll see thumbnails and I'll go, oh, that's an interesting topic. I'll watch like 2 or 3 minutes to get the general gist. And one of the things recently was Eric Bugenhagen was criticizing Mike Mensa's, Mike Mensa's, far from it, Mike Israetel or Israetel or Israel Toe. I don't remember it. Anyway, he was criticizing Mike's training for being overly analytical and trying to optimize every single thing and kind of losing the fun and other benefits of just kind of going in and having a good time. And I really resonated with this with Rick, and I've had experience of this kind of like I've had criticism from these overly scientific types, and I get it. Like I understand his argument. It's very much the same argument I give these kind of people. So let's get into it. I got some perspectives I want to give. So the first thing you have to understand is Eric is the lift heavy, is the intense, have fun in the gym guy. He's very bro sciencey. In saying that, he is a certified strength coach. He actually used to train athletes, and part of his success is his ability to adapt and not just totally go by blindly using science. So he's very well educated in exercise science. He understands the rhyme and reason to the reason he's doing things, but he's also experimenting and just having fun, rather than trying to be absolutely optimal. Whereas Mike Israelto or Israetel or whatever, he is very much I fucking love science guy. Give me the booster shot. Make me optimize every fucking thing in my training. Otherwise, it's dog shit. If I do slow, if you don't do slow negatives, or if you're doing, quick, fast reps, it's useless. And Roddy Coleman must have been CGI, because there's no way you could build a crazy physique with such, fast, unscientific rep speeds. So you have to understand the duality between these two, albeit Eric does have some science background for sure. And I want to go into science now. Science is cool. It's great. I mean, it's what gets you 60-70% of the way there with any topic, especially exercise. You have to use, there are certain principles that you can't get around. There is a metabolic rate. There is calorie surplus deficit maintenance. There's no way around that. There is the requirement for progressive overload. There is a requirement for a certain level of intensity in your training in order to make an adaptation. There is a certain requirement for time and attention. There are many requirements that are set in stone. There is no way around getting them. But then there are many gray areas. There are many areas in exercise science or any science where it's not really set in stone yet. We haven't totally figured it out. And what works for one person may not work for the other. So you have to understand that. Science is great, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. And this kind of ties into bro science being what leads science to figure out the bro science, or at least validate the bro science. So a lot of the shit that Eric does is bro sciencey, albeit pseudosciencey, because he understands the science and is experimenting with things and getting results. So you have to use anecdotes also in exercise. There are so many things in exercise, like nucleus overload, for example. The theory that you train every single day to increase your nuclei in a muscle. So you do high frequency, high volume, low intensity on a daily basis on a specific muscle, and after 6 to 12 months, you increase your nuclei, you potentially create hyperplasia and a bunch of other cool effects. And for years, this was a bro science theory, albeit there was some science in it. There was a rhyme and a reason behind it from people that, hypothesized that this would work. And then you had the anecdotal people that would do it, or the people that anecdotally got results from it. So you'd have, Team 3D Alpha, or the Megan from that, who coined the idea. Thousands of examples of people training high frequency, high intensity, even people that weren't lifting, just random tradies who would wheel wheelbarrows all day, and all of a sudden they had huge traps, or soccer players with their massive calves from running all the time. And then somewhat recently, scientists go, maybe there's something to this. Scientists observe the world around them and try to make sense of it. And then they go, let's try it out. Let's put this in a lab and see if it works. Lo and behold, there's a bunch of white papers that come out, and it turns out it's very well could be a valid form of training. And I don't need a scientist to tell me that nucleus overload works. I've done it myself. I trained my right forearm every day for 3 years for arm wrestling, and all of a sudden, my right forearm is 1.5 inches bigger than my left. So for myself, I don't need a scientist to tell me that it works, because I fucking know it works. Anecdotes are here for a reason. You can't go off anecdotes totally, but enough overwhelming evidence of anecdotes then allows for scientists to go, all right, let's try it out, and oftentimes prove that it's correct, or at least it's sort of correct, because again, there's a gradient. For some people, it may not work as well as others. Then you have to also understand that science is constantly changing. What is proved for a white paper 1 week is then massively disproved the next week for a white paper, because there is not a yes and no answer from humans. We're not omniscient. We don't know the yes and no to everything, and it takes a long time to really generally know what most likely is, or some things are just a straight up fact. But in their early days, a lot of these theories, they very well could work, or they very well couldn't work. And a lot of times, again, the human body is an individual thing. For some, it just simply will not work. So you have to understand, science is constantly changing. What is in 1 week is out the next. And then you have, within those, science experiments, agendas, which then changes the science even more. You have the big companies who are biased, who want to disprove something to make profits, like the sugar companies back in the 60s and 70s, who made their scientists, or paid off their scientists to make it seem like sugar is good for you and fat is terrible for you. And then it wasn't until 40, 50 years later that we realized fat's actually vital for hormone production, joints, brain, numerous things we need fat for. And actually, sugar is highly inflammatory and oftentimes not beneficial at all, depending on the sugar form. Then you have scientists. Scientists have egos. These are really high IQ guys who have spent their entire lives under a certain assumption, and one day they get proven wrong, and it's very hard to get rid of that ego attachment, especially when your life's work is behind it. And then you have the people citing the white papers. So, for example, Dr. Mike Israel, fuck, I'm gonna look it up. Dr. Mike Israetel, where was I? Dr. Mike Israetel he's a volume guy. So his agenda is volume's good, high intensity, not so good. This is demonstrable in his recent videos on Mike Mensa. And he'll cite studies that will push his agenda. He'll use studies that will inaccurately ascertain whether or not volume is superior to high intensity. For example, a lot of these scientific studies that will square up volume, high intensity, they'll get the guys who are doing high intensity to do one set, not to failure. And it's like, well, of course, if you do one set not to failure, one, you're not doing high intensity, and two, of course, you're not going to make gains. The whole idea of high intensity is to overcompensate for the volume with the intensity, and then also slow reps and drop sets and work beyond failure. And then you have this one set to not failure, reps in reserve, versus 4 sets of reps in reserve. Of course, the volume is going to win out because both are they're illogical training systems, but one is slightly more logical than the other. You're overcompensating for the lack of intensity with volume. So of course, oftentimes these novices they put in these scientific experiments, which is an extra component they neglect, which is that novices are better off doing volume because you don't need much intensity to make gains when you're a novice. So of course, if you do a squat 3 times a week when you can squat 3 times a week with reps in reserve, you're going to get better gains than the guy who's squatting once a week that's not even going to failure. So they'll cite these studies, and I would imagine that a guy like Mike Israetel, who is a scientific, has a PhD in exercise science, understands these white papers are fucking retarded. But because of his agenda, either consciously or subconsciously, he's neglecting that aspect because he's pushing his volume agenda. So even the guys who cite the studies have an agenda, of course. Now, when you look at these, just a side note, when you look at high intensity versus volume studies where they actually have trained, seasoned lifters do high intensity 1 set to failure and then some beyond failure versus the guys who are doing volume, the gains are almost identical, if not a lot of the times in these studies, high intensity will show superior gains, probably due to adherence. Next is paralysis by analysis. Now, I used to do volume a lot, and especially with volume, because there's so much science that can go into volume, because there's so many parameters you can tweak. You have all these different things to add to volume, which is a flawed system, and you're using exercise science to optimize these training systems. So you're using RPE and percentage work and, deloads and undulation and concurrent and all these different parameters to go into what is a super complex thing that might be optimal, but at the end of the day, it's so fucking neurotic because you're constantly trying to optimize everything. You're not having any fun and you're not adhering to the training, which ties me to the next 2 points. You gotta have fun with your training or you're not gonna do it, which then ties into compliance as a science. Stan Efferding says it best. Stan Efferding is an exercise scientist. He understands the science, but he also understands, as a meathead, that if you do something that's optimal, but you can't consistently do it because it's boring as fuck and it's too difficult to adhere to, there's no point. So at the end of the day, something that is 90% optimal, done 100% of the time, is 100% more optimal than the thing that you do 0% of the time that's 100% optimal. Now that's my quote, but the compliance is the science. Stan Efferding is correct here. There's many ways to skin a cat, and this is demonstrable in Mike Israetel versus Eric's physique and strength. Albeit, Eric is actually bigger and stronger than Mike. Now, this is a fallacy. Just because someone's bigger and stronger doesn't mean what they're doing is better, although it can. The point is, there's many ways to skin a cat. They're both very muscular, very strong individuals. One is doing what is not optimal, and one's doing what is optimal. And it just goes to show that at the end of the day, really what matters is that you comply to the exercise and you stick with it for a long time. And the best way to do that is high intensity. But this is not really a high intensity video. And I kind of skipped this point, which is slow down. And what I'm referring to here is essentially what made me make this video in the first place. I've been getting a lot of criticism recently from people who are very sciencey, saying I need to slow my rep speed down. And they're coming from a place of love or maybe not love, but they're coming from a place of, I think they're just generally being cool people and they think one thing. But what they don't understand is, say, for example, I'm doing an incline dumbbell press. And on the incline dumbbell press, I do explosive reps because one, it's fun. I like to lift really heavy weights on that specific lift because it's a strength lift. And two, when I slow my reps down under the guise of science, because slow negatives equates to more muscular damage, which is true. And when you slow your rep speed down, you're less likely to get injured, which is true. And when you slow your rep speed down, you have more time and attention, which is important for high intensity training because you get less time and attention from one set, which is true. But you're not understanding, I'm not going to do it if I have to do it slow. Because for me specifically, although the science would show one thing for most people, for me, if I slow my rep speed on that specific movement, the incline dumbbell press, I start recruiting muscles that I'm not looking to recruit. Specifically me. I don't know about others, but that's how it works for me. So fuck your optimization. What's optimal for me is incline dumbbell presses. I do really fast, explosive, fun reps that allow me to contract really heavily on the way up because I'm going fast. And it allows me to feel my pecs rather than doing these slow, grueling reps that are one, harder to progressively overload, so you're not taking that into consideration. And two, I start feeling my front delts if I slow my rep speed down that much. Maybe you don't, but I do. So, in the case of the incline dumbbell press, whatever the science is saying doesn't mean a fucking damn thing to me specifically. You are an individual. Not everything is set in stone when it comes to individual, leverages, all these different things that go into an individual. And then I also overcompensate, for example, followed that up with a flat dumbbell fly, where I then do slow negatives to overcompensate for the incline dumbbell press, because on the flat dumbbell fly, I can do slow negatives because that allows me to feel my pecs great. It's better that I do slow negatives on that. If I do fast dumbbell flies, I don't feel shit. So specifically for me, I then overcompensate with slow negatives on the dumbbell fly. But Mike Israetel, it'd be awesome if he did, because I actually respect the guy. If he watched a video of mine, he would go, wow, look at this guy's dumbbell press. That's retarded. That's too fast. He's not going to build any muscle. Not understanding my own individual experience. Now, you can't use people's individual experiences too much because then you start being too tolerant. But at the end of the day, we are a little different and certain things are up for debate. There is a gray area. So that's kind of where I'm at today. I wanted to just talk about this. Understand that science is great, and I'm not bashing science. I'm not like a fucking, I don't know. But I'm also not the person that's willing to put a bunch of booster shots in my neck and optimize my training as best as I possibly can at the expense of my fun and sanity. So Hope that's informative. I think Eric wins this in many ways because, again, he does understand the science, but also he's willing to have an open mind to a degree and try other stuff. And until next time, see you cunts later.